Welcome, everyone, to the OnPoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, one issue and one issue only, yesterday's federal election, and the role Ontario voters played in the Liberal government's razor-thin victory.
In your column, my column, I'll focus on what an Ontario election 10 years ago has to teach us about 2025.
And I've got a piece up which focuses on all the former Ontario MPPs who quit Queen's Park to go federal, and they all lost for the NDP.
It's Tuesday, April 29th, 2025, so let's get to it.
Hey, partner, little sugar?
Oh, sir.
How late did you stay up last night?
I think I was in bed by 1:30.
1:30?
Yes.
Wimp.
Yeah, I was up at 5:30, if that helps.
Okay, that's not bad. I think we might have got around the same amount of sleep. I think I went to bed about 3:30. Up doing radio, though, by about 7. So it was, anyway, it was a short night. In terms of our fashion choices today, which we always talk about off the top, my shirt says one word and one word only on it, and that word is Ontario. It's a nice picture of a canoe here because I'm starting to think about that. But we want to talk Ontario today and the role that this big province played in the outcome of last night's really quite extraordinary election. And what are you doing? Are you joining the resistance?
Well, you know, I wore this, I think, just before the writ dropped, or maybe like just at the beginning.
Before the writ what?
Before the writ was
Did
issued.
you just say what I thought you just said? You said dropped.
I am underslept.
Just when I think we're making progress and you say the writ dropped. Anyway, all right. Moving along here. Let's...
Yes, so... not enough caffeine in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I given that we have now ended the federal election and we have to go back to remembering that, Donald Trump still lives and governs to the south of us, I thought I would wear the shirt again to remind people.
A good reminder.
Yes.
And with that, meet me on camera 2, Sheldon, where I say, off to issue 1. 3 months ago, the Conservative Party of Canada had a 25-point lead on the Liberals and Justin Trudeau. But then came Donald Trump and Mark Carney, and suddenly the entire dynamic of the Canadian political scene changed. We saw the outcome of those changes last night. The Liberals retain power with a minority government as we speak at this moment. Liberals, 168 seats on the strength of 43.5% of the total vote. Conservatives, 144 seats on the strength of 41.4% of the total vote. And how fascinating is that? Stephen Harper won a majority government in 2011 with 39.5%. Pierre Poilievre does better than that, 41.7%, and he comes second. The Bloc Québécois is the third place party. They get 23 seats with 6.4% of the vote. The New Democrats, 7 seats, a drubbing, with only 5% of the total vote. The Greens got 1 seat. That was Elizabeth May's on 1.2% of the total vote. JMM, it was a tight election.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the story of last night is just a massive consolidation of the vote in the Liberal and Conservative parties. To take just one part of this story, Pierre Poilievre led the Conservative Party to its highest share of the popular vote since 1988.
Wow.
I was 7. Still came in second. A more onpoli-focused angle here. Coming in second, Poilievre and the Conservatives have so far, as we are counting, earned 1.1 million more votes from Ontario in this federal election than Doug Ford won in the provincial election earlier this year. Now, it was a higher turnout election. It was 67%, I believe, from Elections Canada. So obviously those numbers were going to be larger. But I do want to stress that, turnout is just a result of choices that politicians and voters make. It's not dictated. Poilievre motivated 1.1 million more people to come out and vote for him in this federal election. That's not accidental, and it's not something you can sort of wave away. I think that's going to be part of a story that we talk about a bit more in months to come. Just again, noting for our listeners that as we are reading off some of these numbers, they are subject to change. Elections Canada has restarted the count, and it's possible some of these numbers might change slightly, but at this point, we're not expecting major changes in the seat count.
One of the things I thought we would anticipate is a higher overall vote count, in other words, a higher turnout. what do we get, 67% or something like that?
67%, yeah.
Okay, I think the all-time turnout was 1958 with the Diefenbaker sweep, and it was up around 70, I forget now, 6, 7, 8, something like that. I thought we'd get a higher vote count this time just because there was so much at stake. We did, however. The early polls, those were big numbers, right?
Right. We got 7.3 million people voted early this election. So something like a quarter of the total turnout was early vote. That is a substantial increase from the 2021 election, which saw about 5.8 million people vote early. There's a big question about whether early voting preferentially benefits one party or the other. I'm not sure that we have real evidence there. It's not clear to me that early voting actually induces more people to vote overall than would otherwise. Maybe it's just people who would have voted anyway, just find a more convenient time to do it. Nevertheless, 7.3 million people early voting, it certainly mattered in terms of the way that the votes were counted and registered last night.
Indeed. And let's stress this point again. We're going to give you some more numbers now on what the province of Ontario did last night. But, of course, they are still counting, so these numbers are subject to change. We are the OnPoli podcast, so we are going to put what this province's voters did under the microscope right now. 122 seats in the province of Ontario, and here is what you did with your votes last night. The Liberals were the number one party in the province, 69 seats on the strength of, if you can imagine, almost 49% of the total vote in the province. But the Conservatives not far behind, 53 seats, thanks to 44% of the vote. New Democrats, 0 seats in the province of Ontario. They had 5, they lost them all, because they got less than 5% of the total vote. What is fascinating is that only 2 months ago, we just had a provincial election 2 months ago, these same voters gave Doug Ford's Conservatives 80 seats. They gave Pierre Poilievre 53. They gave Marat Stiles' NDP 27 seats. They gave Jagmeet Singh 0. They gave Bonnie Crombie's Liberals 14 seats. They gave Mark Carney's Liberals 69.
And if I could add one more, they gave the Green Party 2 seats, Mike Schreiner and Ashland Clancy. The Green Party had 1 seat prior to this election. They have lost that one as well.
Indeed. I hear a lot from political candidates all the time that when they go knocking on doors, voters do not distinguish between, federal Liberals and provincial Liberals, or, the federal parties and the provincial parties. Well, clearly they do when they want to, because they've delivered within a very short space of time 2 dramatically different sets of results. Federal party, provincial party, no difference? Not true. Big differences in these 2 elections. Now, there were some other unusual developments as well. As we indicated, the NDP lost all their seats in Ontario, but most interestingly, they're not losing votes to Liberals, they're losing votes to Conservatives. This is, I have to say, a bit of a slap in the face to those who believe in the whole strategic voting thing, who say that the presence of the NDP takes away votes from, quote unquote, the progressive parties, as in the Liberals. Maybe not. The NDP vote disappeared, but in so many ridings, it went to Conservative candidates. So those are not progressive voters who are obviously moving to the Conservatives. They are, if I can call them this, get ready with the bleep switch there. These are screw you voters. These are blue-collar voters looking out for the little guy, ticked off at the man type of voters. Yeah. And once the NDP loses them, you wonder what they got left.
This is something, we've seen now. I could go back to the 2010 election in Toronto for when Rob Ford won as mayor. He won in a lot of places that had actually voted NDP historically in the city, including what was then my own ward. And we've seen that style of politics continue to grow in strength to the point where it's now, frankly, part of the national arena. It's just as you say, a screw you vote among people who are not do not see the world through like an ideological prism of like left versus right policy prescriptions. They are looking at basically who is on their side and maybe who's going to hurt the people they want to see hurt.
Bingo. Now, you and I come from the school of thought, which is that pretty much every riding has a story to tell, and so some ridings had some very fascinating stories last night. So we're going to go through a handful of ridings right now and just talk about those stories. Why don't you start us off?
Yeah, let's go through some of the big ones. I think the big question for me was going to be, would Mark Carney win his seat in Nepean? It will be his first election.
Yeah.
He has never held elected office before. He won Nepean quite handily, 60% of the vote, looks like. Next door, however, Carleton, Pierre Poilievre's riding, Poilievre did not carry his seat. I don't think this is like fatal to his future political ambitions. They will find a conservative MP to suddenly discover an urgent need to spend more time with their family, and Poilievre will be back in the Commons, I'm sure.
Just make that point. Pierre Poilievre cannot lead the conservative forces in the House of Commons during question period, which he may be one of the best at ever, because he doesn't have a seat right now.
Yeah, and also, like, one thing that I'm sure people are going to do some calculations about is that Pierre Poilievre does not control the timing of a by-election if a Conservative MP resigns. So that will be another issue. Toronto-St. Paul's, we talked about that. That was a big riding when the Liberals lost it in a by-election last year. That arguably maybe started the snowball rolling that culminated in Justin Trudeau resigning. Real crisis for the Liberal Party when they lost it. But to Canadian Liberals everywhere, a sense of order to the universe has been restored. They won Toronto-St. Paul's. Leslie Church will be the MP for that riding. Burlington, bellwether riding, one that tends to vote with the party that forms government. Also, the riding of Karina Gould, who ran in the leadership race against Mark Carney. She won her riding handily. But it's worth mentioning that the Liberals did not perform as well in the broader GTHA as they might have wanted, as some of the polls indicated they would. And that's why we're looking at a minority and not a majority that they might have otherwise...
At the moment.
At the moment, that they might otherwise have hoped for. And then we're going to talk about that a bit later, but I was also keeping an eye on the 3 ridings where provincial New Democrats ran federally. It did not go well for them.
No, they all not only lost, they all came third.
Yeah, big blowout numbers.
This does show you that even if you have some personal popularity, as these 3 former New Democrat MPPs had, when there are bigger trends happening and an unpopular leader and an unpopular party, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, I mean, not to belabor the point here, but I think of somebody like Joel Harden in Ottawa Centre, a man who had, made his name and his relationship with that riding in large part because of how he supported the community during the convoy protests. As you say, now 3rd place. I mean, that is a tough loss.
Yeah. Okay, I want to take a look at a handful of ridings as well here, and I'm going to start with the riding just north of us here in the studio, which is Eglinton Lawrence. Vince Gasparo against Karen Stintz. This is a guy, Vince Gasparo, who ran for the provincial Liberals just a couple of months ago and lost by just, it was 167 votes, something like that. As of this moment, he is leading there. Still too close to call. They haven't called that one yet. Broadcasters. How did broadcasters do? Well, a bit of a mixed record there. In Toronto Centre, the former journalist Evan Solomon won. But in Ajax, the former 640 Toronto radio announcer Greg Brady lost to one of Toronto's deputy mayors, Jennifer McKelvey. In Hamilton West, Ancaster Dundas. This is the granddaughter of the former Lieutenant Governor Lincoln Alexander. Her name is Erica Alexander. She lost for the Conservatives in a seat that many people in the Hamilton area thought the Conservatives ought to pick up. In York Centre, Roman Baber was booted out of the Ontario PC caucus. You may remember he ran afoul of Doug Ford and the Premier's office staffers. He decided to leave, go independent, then left altogether and went federal. And what does he do? He knocks off a sitting cabinet minister in that riding in Yara Sachs. Kitchener Centre, you mentioned, the only Green seat in Ontario, one of only 2 in the country, and Mike Morris lost it for the Greens last night. Hamilton Centre, what a shocker. As strong an NDP seat as anywhere in the province of Ontario, and the NDP's Matthew Green, long-serving MP there, lost his seat. Ended up being, the Conservatives actually led in that seat for a part of the night, but the Liberals ultimately took it. Yeah. An inner-city Hamilton seat, the NDP loses it. Another one, Brian Massey in Windsor. I mean, the guy's been the MP there for 23 years. But as we say, when the tide goes out, it takes a lot of good people with it. Brian Massey is one of those good people. He lost his Windsor seat. Again, the surprising takeaway last night, the NDP vote collapsed but didn't go Liberal. It went Conservative. And a lot of Liberals in Ontario didn't win seats because the NDP vote went to the Conservatives in places like the 905, Cambridge, Windsor-Tecumseh Lakeshore, In Northern Ontario, can you imagine that? The Conservatives won seats in Northern Ontario, Sudbury, East, Manitoulin, Nickel Belt. I mean, that should be an NDP seat. It went Conservative. Not Carleton, strangely enough. How do you win so big in so much of Ontario, and how does the leader, Pierre Poilievre, lose his own seat in Carleton? I don't get it. This is one of those, we talked after the Ontario election about how there were certain anomalies, Liberals winning seats in the middle of a sea of Tory blue. A lot of that happened last night too, where things just sort of, in many cases, did not unfold as we had expected.
Just talking about the places where the Tories won, it does remind me of the patterns that we have seen with the Tories under Doug Ford, where they have won in areas of the province that are more traditionally NDP. Right, the Tories have won seats in Windsor, they've won seats in Northern Ontario, and so as much as there is currently a dispute between different parts of the Conservative movement, like the broad trends don't look that different. But we can talk a bit more about that later. We did see, it looks like, a tightening of the polls over the last week. This is another reason why that early vote.
Last weekend, actually.
Yeah. And this is another reason why that early vote is so important for these results, right? The Liberals seem to have banked a lot of support, a week or so ago, when they, instead of being, within 3 points of the Tories, they were more like 5 to 7 points ahead of the Tories, depending on which polls you liked, right? Maybe a whole bunch of people who had voted early might have changed their minds if they'd had the opportunity to. We don't know, but the Liberals have to be really happy with the way those early votes turned out. We also seemed to, we've talked about this. We saw plenty of ridings where even if the NDP vote didn't sort of mechanically go to the Tories, we've definitely seen places where the NDP vote fell, but it didn't benefit the Liberals enough to push them over the top. So, very, very interesting set of results that I'm sure others, frankly, more A, more caffeinated, and B, more data-oriented will be pouring over this morning.
Yeah. We're going to talk about the speeches in just a second, but I just have to, before we do that, mention the fact that perhaps the most interesting oration last night did not come in a leader speech, but came in a post-election results scrum that I think the CBC's David Common did with Jamil Javani, who's one of the candidates out in Durham Region for the Conservatives. He held his seat as a member of Parliament there. Jamil Javani went medieval on the Premier's office. He called Doug Ford supporters in his office a bunch of goons. He told the Premier that he should have kept his nose out of federal party business. There's no doubt in my mind, I'm prepared to be told I'm wrong about this, but there's no doubt in my mind that the absolute enmity, I was going to say antipathy, but it's stronger than that, the enmity between Pierre Poilievre's leader's office and Doug Ford's leader's office, both ostensibly Conservatives, the deterioration of that relationship dramatically affected the Conservative Party of Canada's ability to do better in Ontario last night. They did fairly well, but not well enough. And that screed by Javani on Ford and his minions may be the most memorable speech that was given last night.
You've just spoken to your supporters, a large group that's here at the pub here in Bowmanville, North Oshawa, and you said to them, among other things, that Doug Ford was a problem for you in this campaign. You said that he sabotaged the Conservative campaign. That's your words. You said he was a hype man for the Liberals. Take me through how you see that.
When it was our turn to run an election, he couldn't stay out of our business, always getting his criticisms and all his opinions out, distracting our campaign, trying to make it about him, trying to position himself as some kind of political genius that we needed to be taking cues from.
Okay, then. Let's talk speeches.
Yes.
I know it's very easy to sort of punch down on people when they're at their worst moment, so I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
I want to point out that Jagmeet Singh had a hard time getting through his speech last night because he had just led the New Democrats to one of their worst showings ever, and he had a hard time keeping it together, and that is completely understandable. He lost his own seat.
Yeah.
Two leaders lost their seats in this election. That has happened before. Michael Ignatieff, Gilles Duceppe, 2011.
Right.
Okay, so that's Jagmeet Singh. Pierre Poilievre. I know there are a lot of people in this province and country who can't stand Pierre Poilievre.
Yes.
But he had a hard job last night. He had to go out to the microphones and he had to acknowledge that he was a guy who blew a big lead and lost his own seat, and he had to do it with a smile on his face while giving an indication to his troops that he was not intending to resign. He wants to continue to fight. He said, victory will come, but it'll take time, clearly planting his flag on the notion that I intend to stick around, have somebody resign, call a by-election, get back into the House, and lead the Conservative Party into whatever goes forward. Maybe others will have a different view about that, but clearly that was his intention. And those speeches, I can tell you, because I've seen a few of them in my day, those speeches are very hard to give, and both leaders kept it together. I will be mildly critical here. I thought Mark Carney gave a fine speech last night. It was classy. He congratulated everybody for running. He congratulated his leadership opponents on their performances. I'm not sure who thought it was a good idea to give the long version of the victory speech at 2:30 in the morning. Like, honest to goodness, that speech should have been a lot shorter.
Right.
It had its funny moments. It had its touching moments. It had its strong moments. I mean, Mark Carney has really developed as a speaker, but holy smokes, folks, 2:30 in the morning, give the short version, Anyway, that's my little pet peeve about that one. How about you?
Regarding Pierre Poilievre's speech and, him saying, he will stay on as leader. Of course, this is not entirely up to him,
Correct.
right? There will be some move afoot that, there are people critical of Poilievre within the Conservative Party. I don't get the sense at this point that they are a majority. I don't think that there's that much power behind any move to unseat him. Nothing like what we saw after Aaron O'Toole lost the election.
There's no Pierre Poilievre out there nipping at the heels of Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, exactly. Very well said.
Mm-hmm.
No, but I do think that there are some people, primarily, I will say, on the progressive side of Ontario politics, who I think are nursing this idea that Doug Ford is going to challenge Poilievre for the leadership of the Conservative Party. And I would just go back to that 1.1 million more votes that Poilievre won last night than Doug Ford did earlier this year. If Ford or the people around Ford want to start a fight for a battle for the soul of conservative leadership in this country, it's not clear to me this morning that Doug Ford would win that fight.
Right.
So I think Poilievre's speech was interesting. I think we will see the other thing that, at the risk of maybe I'm reading too much into something that maybe wasn't even there, was a relatively soft speech. It was magnanimous to some of the parties, and that was not, frankly, a tone that we saw a ton of from Pierre Poilievre through the election campaign. And I do wonder if they are, Poilievre and the people around him are thinking that the hard reset they need to do to convince voters that he is, frankly, not as scary, for lack of a better word. Whether they are starting that hard reset now, I guess we will find out in the days to come if he keeps a softer, more magnanimous tone, or whether he keeps his elbows up, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Okay, let me do one more thing here, and that is, it can sometimes get lost in all the analysis of numbers and ridings and strategy and politics and this and that. One significant overarching thing can get obscured, and that is, we need to talk about what an extraordinary moment this is for Mark Carney and the Liberals.
Yeah.
Mark Carney, as his wife indicated last night, when they were first courting, decades ago, he did say, when they were in England together at school, he did say to her, I do intend to go back to Canada and work in public service. Yeah. And that was part of the deal if they were going to be together as a couple. I remember when I met Mark Carney for the first time, it was probably 15 years ago, and at that time, he was not making any secret of the fact that he wanted someday to get into politics, likely as a Liberal, and he was just sort of waiting for the right moment. Despite lots of attempts to get him to sort of jump into politics sooner than later, he held off, and he demonstrated a kind of political acumen that was pretty smart for a rookie politician. I mean, he picked the moment in history when his skill set met the moment. He may be a rookie politician, but his political instincts were pretty good there, or if they weren't his, he certainly took good advice from people who gave him that advice, so you got to hand it to him. Success in politics is about good talent, meeting good timing, and good luck, and Carney hit the trifecta on that last night, which is the reason why he's still Prime Minister today.
And I have to add, everything's going to get harder now, right? He has not had to face a House of Commons. He has not had to manage a Commons caucus in the midst of like having to pass a legislative agenda. He has not had to deal really extensively with 13 premiers, all of whom have their own agendas and have their own policy demands. Always better to win an election than to lose it, but it would be very interesting to see. Again, meaning no disrespect, but he's never held elected office before, and these are jobs that you get better at by doing them. And he is a rookie politician tossed into what is the most difficult job in Canada, and I think we can sort of. In a sense of goodwill to all elected leaders, we can wish him good luck and say he might need it.
And with that, let's get off to your column, my column. Okay, you know this feature. We call it Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I talk about the columns we wrote for TVO.org over the past week. I think I wrote mine at 3:30 in the morning this morning, so it's a little fresh, but what have you got going?
Yeah, I was still typing at 1 a.m., and I hope, well, my editor says it's all still English and grammatically correct, so that's all I'm hoping for. You recall the 2014 election.
I do.
I've been thinking a lot about the
Ontario
2014
election.
The Ontario election, yes. I've been thinking a lot about the Ontario election from 2014 the last few weeks because, frankly, a lot of the themes seem to be similar, right? The Liberal Party of the day had replaced an unpopular leader with a new face. They parlayed that into a renewed mandate. In the case of the 2014 election, Kathleen Wynne won a majority. Mark Carney has not won a majority so far, but turned around a 20-point deficit to remain in government. That is a truly remarkable achievement. But the point that I wanted to make in this column is that there are also warning signs, right? That there were warning signs that the Liberals, the Ontario Liberals, ignored in 2014 in the euphoria of going from a minority to a majority. They got wiped out in Windsor. They, frankly, were a lot less competitive in parts of the province that Dalton McGuinty had won in 2003 and in 2007. There were all these warning signs that got ignored, and then Kathleen Wynne proceeded to make decisions, things like the partial privatization of Hydro One, mucking around with the Sudbury by-election. Mm-hmm. These things became very unpopular, and of course we know how that story ended. The Liberals have not been competitive for power at the provincial level in 3 election cycles.
Generous way to put it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't have anything quite like that as a blinking warning sign for Mark Carney and the Liberals. How could we? But I will sort of just go back to some of the numbers we've already discussed today, right? Pierre Poilievre has put up the strongest showing for a Conservative Party since I was in grade school. That is not a sign that Canada's voters are handing the Liberals a blank check. Mm-hmm. Right? This is, in fact, a sign that many, many millions of people strongly preferred the other guy. And I think that's the clearest warning sign for the Liberals not to let the euphoria of really dodging the executioner's blade, not to let that euphoria get away from them.
Well, you and I both like these kinds of columns where history doesn't repeat, but it often does rhyme.
Yes.
And I also plucked a favorite election of mine from the past. It was one of the most dramatic that I can ever remember covering. And in this case, I want to take you back to the summer of 1984. And David Peterson, who was then the leader of the Ontario Liberals, looks like he's going absolutely nowhere. His polling numbers are in the dumpers. No one's ever heard. 90% of Ontarians cannot identify him. He looks like he is a dead man walking. And as a result, 4 of his caucus members from the Ontario Liberals decide, you know what? John Turner just got picked as the new federal leader. He sure looks good. I think he's going to keep the Liberal brand going and refresh it and win an election for the federal Liberals. So we're going to quit Queen's Park. We're going to run federally. And we're going to all get cabinet jobs federally. And meantime, we're going to leave Peterson in the dust because he's not going anywhere. Well, politics is a funny business. Yes. And what happens? 9 months later, David Peterson is the premier. And 3 of those 4 who abandoned him got elected. The 4th one did not. But those 3 who abandoned him ended up on the opposition benches federally for almost another decade because John Turner, unfortunately for them, was not the second coming of you-know-who. And as a result, they made a curious decision. Well, history rhymed last night. We saw 3 new Democrats leave Queen's Park, very safe seats that they no doubt could have retained, trying to try their luck federally, and it didn't work. All 3 of them lost quite badly. The verdict is still out in Milton. Former Conservative cabinet minister for Doug Ford, Parm Gill, gave up a pretty good job and a pretty safe seat to run federally on the thinking that Pierre Poilievre was going to win a smashing majority government and he would get a federal cabinet job. As of this moment, because they're still counting the votes there, as of this moment, he's got a lead of a few hundred votes over his Liberal competitor. But that seat sort of went back and forth all night long. If he wins, he's got a job as an MP, but he's not going into cabinet. And if he loses, people will obviously question his judgment about the advisability of giving up a really good job in a solid government, which three-peated, to go federally for something that didn't work out. Timing, a change in dynamics, and luck, you just cannot predict when they will strike. But there we go.
So I was just looking it up while you were speaking, and currently we have Parm Gill ahead by like 500 votes.
There you go. Out of probably 60,000 cast.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
With 1 poll remaining to report.
Oh my gosh. There we go.
Yes, still up in the air.
Yeah. Now, before we go to the mailbag,
yes,
I have some advice for you.
Okay.
I went to visit 96-year-old former Ontario Liberal leader Bob Nixon on the weekend, and he is an onpoli watcher.
Oh, wow.
And listener, so we're very happy about that. Mr. Nixon did say to me in passing, you know, when your buddy reads the letters, he goes too quietly and too quickly. So if you can, get him to go slowly and enunciate more so that I can follow along. Mr. Nixon, I've passed along your advice, so JMM, you're on notice. If you've got a burning question or insightful comment, send it along to us at onpolitics@tvo.org. And just before we actually get to that again, I do want to put in a little word of thanks to everyone who wrote about my column from last week about the agenda wrapping up. Very nice to get your lovely comments about all of that. Still a couple of months to go for the agenda, so let's get back to business here. What do we got this week?
Here's a question from Joe Bishop in Petawawa, who writes, "Hello, Steve and John Michael. I enjoy your program. Glad you will continue. With the threat to our sovereignty from the USA, would it be feasible to invite our head of state, the King and Right of Canada, to preside over the opening of the new Parliament? It would be a clear message to all that Canada is indeed an independent country with our own institutions." Joe Bishop, Petawawa.
Isn't that neat? Now, there has been some speculation about this in the popular press of the United Kingdom.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember now. It has happened in the past where the sovereign has actually read the Canadian throne speech here, right?
Yes. Queen Elizabeth II read the speech from the throne twice, in 1957 and then in 1977.
Huh.
Of course, in the UK, the king reads the throne speech at the opening of every parliament. It's a bit tricky for Charles III in this situation because there are some delicate constitutional issues here, right? The king is not supposed to be partial about government policy. And the king is also he's the king of Canada and the king of the United Kingdom separately. And the United Kingdom is currently very feverishly trying to paper over any disagreements between themselves and the United States. And so having the king come out and speak in defense of Canada's sovereignty, I want to see it, but it does pose an interesting dilemma for the king. You mentioned the reporting in the popular press. We want to be charitable to our colleagues in journalism across the pond, but I will say that one rumor in one British paper about this maybe happening is not something I would take to the bank. But it has happened before. It could happen again. It is the kind of thing that you probably wouldn't even hear any kind of official notice about until after the election properly. So it might happen.
King does like us.
Yes, and he's been giving signs of his partiality to Canada. There have been reports of him, wearing some Canadian insignia on his, like when he goes on board a naval vessel. He's been wearing Canadian insignia as part of his naval uniform. In a speech to the Italian Parliament, he spoke about his role both as the King of Great Britain and the King of Canada because of Canada's role in fighting fascism in Italy during World War II. So he is seems to be discreetly trying to signal his support, but a speech from the throne might be seen as a heavier lift, if I can use that word.
I think some Canadians would like to see the king exercise less discretion and just get out there and say, Donald, keep your mitts off, part of my Commonwealth. But I'm not sure that's about to happen.
Did you hear that wacky idea about the king inviting Trump to for the United States to join the British Commonwealth? This was one of these weird ideas that went around Twitter and Fox News, and then Donald Trump, of course, retweeted being sounds like a great idea. And we're like, didn't you guys have a revolution to not be part of the Commonwealth?
I seem to recall that, yeah. 1776 and so on?
Yes, and so on.
Exactly. Give the email address, my friend, and let's get out of here.
Yes, absolutely. Once again, if you'd like to ask about any content on the show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org, and I hope that I read more slowly and enunciated more clearly for all of our listeners.
I'm going to be in touch with Mr. Nixon, and I'm going to get the verdict on this one, so I'll let you know next week. That is the On Poly podcast for this Tuesday, April 29th, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available, and you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're always happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Please include your first and last name and where you're from.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Our managing editor is Katie O'Connor. Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
Special thanks to the studio crew for making the video podcast happen, and we are back in your inboxes and on television this Friday. So until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.